Ignacio here from Bags with a quick disclaimer before we start the episode. Um, it's tax season. Taxes are scary, and we do our best in this episode to share our lived experience as tax-paying business owners and how we've worked with our clients in the past. However, none of the content in this episode is legal advice, tax advice. Please do your own homework. Please work with your trusted partner and make sure that you're filing taxes in a way that is correspondent to your business because every business is unique. Thanks so much. Let's dive in.
Hey, it's William from Bags, and welcome to the CashPod, your go-to guide to building a bigger, better, cash-flowing business. Thank you for spending some time with us as we talk about everything business growth, mastering your finances, accessing capital, and scaling up without burning out. Tax season is almost here, so in this episode, Ignacio and I are going to break down everything we've learned in our tax-paying experience as business owners, everything from key dates, the tools we like, and tips on how to make sure you get the right tax partner so you're not paying more for less and leaving your maximum refund or minimum payment out on the table. Let's dive in and get you prepped for the smoothest tax season you've ever had.
All right, let's get right into it. Taxes. Tax season, everyone's favorite topic as both a person and a business owner. Let's just take it from the top. Will, if you were explaining tax filings to someone that is just starting a business and having to file their taxes for their first year, how does it work? What are the key dates?
Yeah, I mean, if only, right? If only it was really simple to understand when you have to file, what you have to file, and how to go about filing it. I think what any business owner should be aware of is both the fact that you will be paying federal and state taxes, and depending on your entity type, there are different deadlines for things like that. And you will also very likely need to file sales tax, at least in the state where you operate from, but also in any state where you meet what's called a physical or an economic nexus. And we can dig into what those two things mean in a little bit when we talk specifically about sales taxes. But generally speaking, to give a high level overview of tax season, at the end of the fiscal year, which for most businesses is December 3rd, every business wants to make sure that their books are in order so that it is pretty straightforward to fill out the tax forms that are required for filing with the federal government and the state government and the state in which the business operates or states. From there, typically the process is as follows. Every year, the IRS has new documents that guide how taxes are filed. Those tend to be issued in February. For the most part, business taxes are going to be due in April. But what's important to note is that you cannot file before the documentation is issued by the IRS in February, but you can file as soon as you want once those documents are in hand. For businesses, there are different incentives to determine when you're going to file. There's the option to file an extension and pay your taxes later in the year. For the most part, we at Bags encourage businesses and business owners who have a desire to grow and a desire to access capital to get their taxes filed as quickly as possible because that tax form can be really useful in submitting loan applications.
Yeah, I think even like from the logistical perspective, it's almost funny, right? Like you end December 31st and then you have 4 months to file. Is that right? Yep, pretty
Yeah,
much.
about.
About 3.5, 4 months. That's a long time. And I think what's interesting is everyone, and I like, I'll hold my hands up. I've done this in the past, like waits for the last 2 weeks to get their numbers in order, get their life together, get their business information and file. And I think it's just like an extremely overwhelming experience. And I think part of it is because like the deadline is constantly advertised, but that February to April window isn't, which is just like, if I honestly, until we started working on this, I wasn't like aware that you could file as early as mid-February because it's calmer, it's easier, no one's dealing with your stuff. But I think the kind of counterpoint or like trade-off there is that you have to be prepared with your docs earlier and you have to have a clean year for the previous year. And not everyone has that done unless they work with Bags, of course. But I think it's like another point on like why monthly finances are so important and why keeping on top of the monthly things, just like it's going to reduce that stress and pain and burden so aggressively. How do you know if you're doing your taxes right?
Well, so I mean, there's like right, which is legally right. Like, are you complying with what the government requires? Typically, in order to do that, you need a CPA, a certified public accountant, someone who is legally certified to provide tax services, and is going to be able to ensure that you're filing correctly. The other thing that's super important is, and I've seen it happen a lot of times, this is a very simple trade-off. If your books are clean, it's really easy to prep your taxes right and file them correctly, including getting you all the breaks that you can get. There's a lot of tax credits out there for things like R&D, research and development. There's a bunch of other different ways that you can get deductions. But if your books are messy, your accountant is really just gonna grab whatever information they can, put it in the rows, and avoid filing deductions that might be suspect or iffy just to get it all done. And by the way, if you're filing in the last 2 weeks before the deadline, your CPA is unlikely to be flexible to dig in and help you out and help identify things when it's going to take a lot of work.
Yeah. Because again, it's just like that pressure point. It's like the whole accounting world and tax world converges on a single date.
Like, we have a tax team, and our tax team works more during that 2 week period than the entire rest of the year, it seems, right? And I mean, there's sales tax going on, there's payroll taxes going on, but generally speaking, that is by far the busy period up until the secondary deadline for extensions. But even still, that initial window is going to be the busiest period for your CPA. So if you can like give them a break and get it done in February, you're going to get more attention, more care. And if your books are clean, you're going to get the best deal possible with the IRS.
I think actually touching on the extensions and like really clarifying how that works and what what does it take to file an extension? How does it work if you succeed in getting that extension approved? And what happens if you file your taxes late? What's the dynamic there? Let's shed a little bit of light, because I think it's a pretty nebulous space.
100%. So highlight, right? If I can give one piece of information on extensions, this is it. The only time you should file an extension is if you're expecting to owe a substantial amount of money to the federal government in the form of taxes, and you need to generate some revenue and you're confident you will generate cash that can be used to make that payment in the period between the first deadline and the second deadline. If that's not the situation, get your taxes done.
Get your taxes.
Yes. The way the extension works is really simple, right? Your CPA can file an extension for you. It's a simple filing. You want to get it done before the tax deadline. Important note, once the initial deadline has passed, you cannot file an extension. You're then just in the penalty window. Now, it's important to note that the penalties don't tend to be very onerous. In most cases, you can also petition to have penalties waived once you've made everything correct. Payment plans are often accessible and offered. Your CPA, in some cases, depending on who you're working with, we definitely do it, can help you set up a payment plan if the tax burden is going to be high. And so it's always an option to extend. You want to extend before the deadline. If you're not going to make the deadline, you definitely need to extend from a prep and filing standpoint. And then the final thing is, if you're expecting a refund, you should probably file early, because you can get that cash back faster. And keep in mind, the IRS is processing literally millions of business returns over the course of the year. And if you are in the middle of the pack, you're also going to be in the middle of the pack in terms of getting your money back.
Which I think is just like critical, right? Like that check in terms of like a little bit of cash back for your taxes in the year can go a really long way. And I think that's true for both like your personal taxes and the business taxes. Let's get into, different taxes, different business structures. I think the one that most folks will be curious about, and which even on a personal level, I always want to like go into that website and clarify, is like, how do you file taxes as someone that is, a single, basically, if you have an LLC and you have to file personal taxes as well, how does that interplay with, or like, how do those two things interplay? Because they're super interlaced in the US system.
Yes. So put simply, an LLC that is what's called a single member LLC. So if it is an LLC that's just one person, typically you will fold your personal taxes into that business return using what's called a Schedule C. So you'll file your standard business taxes, And the Schedule C will include all your personal details. So anybody who has what we refer to as like a personal LLC or has a small LLC that they're running as a business that is entirely owned by the individual can be the person who owns that business will benefit from including their personal return in most cases in that business return, particularly because any personal expenses incurred on behalf of the business can then be associated with the business instead of the individual. And corporate tax rates tend to be better than personal individual tax rates.
How does that differentiate from like, if you're a single person and you have a C Corp or you've just started a C Corp?
Yeah. So, and if you're a C Corp, you have two filings. You have to file for your business and then you have to file for yourself. Don't skip one. You got to do both, and they're going to be separate.
I find it really interesting how nuanced the US system is in terms of even understanding what you need to file taxes for, right? Like you could be a business owner that has like all their things organized, all their numbers in a good place, and you still don't really know what you need and don't need to file taxes for based on like very specific nuances. Like how do you, or where do you recommend someone like go and do their homework and do the research to figure out like they're, for example, a business operating in Florida that also sells in New York that happens to be a single person LLC. That's like 4 or 5 filings, but it's hard to know, if you need to, if you don't, how do you do that if you're flying solo on this?
Yeah. So this all starts in record keeping. I think the first thing that every business owner needs to do is keep their records clean and organized. And by that, I mean, like, do you know what entity type you have? For some people, that might seem obvious, but I've been in situations where we've helped people file taxes for entities that they're not sure if it's an LLC or a C Corp. Generally speaking, articles of incorporation don't include that information. So if there's not clean records and good storage of information and the good maintenance of information within the organization, you can get into trouble immediately because guess what? A multi-member LLC, the taxes are due on March 17th, and a single member LLC, they're due on April 15th. So the deadlines change. But once you're really confident in, what type of entity you are, you have your books in order to know what you need to file. I think, right, like this information is all publicly available. Your best bet is to get it from government sources. So the IRS has all the deadlines publicly listed, but knowing what you're required to do, often you want to have a good partner. For early stage businesses, it can be expensive to keep a CPA on call, but you can hire a CPA once a year to do your taxes. If you are committed to maintaining your business financials and your business growth, we believe it's fully worth the cost of having a bookkeeper on a monthly basis and a bookkeeper that can coordinate with your tax team or works directly, in our case, with the tax team to make sure that you are getting clear notifications about what you want to file for. Additionally, tons of different softwares, including Bags, offer deadline information. So if you run a Shopify store, they're going to tell you when they think you've hit a sales tax nexus in a new state. For payroll taxes, if you're using a platform like Gusto, they're going to let you know that you owe payroll taxes in a certain state. They're going to ensure that you're registered to pay those payroll taxes in that state, and they'll keep track of what you owe as well.
Yeah, I think that's the keeping track in software, I think is actually really important. But I would also say, like kind words of warning there is like always do your homework and go to the
100%.
IRS as well. Like, and it's not for lack of trying, it is really complex. Like we've built our tooling internally, and when we were building that out, we were just like, this is so particular and so nuanced and based on like variables that aren't easy to get access to in terms of business information unless you're like working closely with that business like we are. Kind of shifting gears a little bit there, I think I'd love to kind of do a quick fire on like and I'll give a bit of context here, but I think a lot of the ease or difficulty of your tax season will depend on a lot of things that are not necessarily the tax filing. What are your top 3 tips for making your life easier during tax season that obviously wouldn't be file your taxes on time?
Right. Outside of filing your taxes on time, and in my opinion, filing your taxes early, the number one thing you can do is maintain clean financial records, right? If your books are messy, then it's going to be hard to get the best tax filing. It's going to take longer to get your taxes filed. You might experience delays that require you to file an extension. You might miss your deadline and incur some fees. So clean financials 100%. The other thing I think is to like you just said, do your homework. So check the IRS site, know what you need to file, understand your numbers so that you know if it makes sense for you to file your taxes quarterly rather than annually. It might be more expensive to do the filings, but if you're getting a cash kickback during that period, does it offset and give you some cash to fuel your business? And third, let me run through the list of options in my head really quick. Third is to have a trusted partner, right? Like don't do all the work yourself and understand what you're getting into, right? Without naming any names, there are companies out there that provide tax services that spend billions of dollars a year lobbying to keep this very complicated because they are at an economic advantage because they know how to do something that the average person doesn't. But with a little bit of research and strategy, you can get all the information that's necessary to handle that. And with a small investment, you can secure a partner who has already done that work and already knows what's going on and is gonna, you could probably do a quick online filing for 60, $70. But if that's not going to get you the deductions that your business deserves, then that's going to, the costs are going to way outweigh the benefits in terms of maybe like the ease and the timeline and the cost, the initial cost.
I love those three. I think those would actually be my top three as well. If I had to add a few more on my side, I would say, especially in tandem with that trusted partner, like ask a ton of questions. Because I think like one piece around the complexity of tax filings is like, obviously the ideal thing is just like work with an expert, but also make sure that you are an expert in your business and that you communicate the nuances of your business to the tax expert. Because I think it's like where tax expertise meets business expertise is where you can maximize your returns, minimize your payments, make sure that like it's a very fair outcome for your business. And I think like one that I'm just going to kind of say out loud because we talk a lot about minimizing taxes and things like that is also just like, especially in the early days as a business owner, just like wrap your head around like taxes are part of the game. Don't count on taxes or tax returns as part of your cash flow, right? Like it should definitely be a benefit. It should definitely be considered, but like don't make your business dependent on that to function well. And I think that's a really big one for me. I think even on a personal level, it's just I think there's a book called, and the title is terrible, but the book is great, The Millionaire Fast Lane. And one thing that this author does is he like really says it's around personal finance and personal financial planning. He says like you're gonna make your life way easier if you just assume the highest tax rate and then plan your finances and cash flow around the remainder. And I think that's just like such a sturdy principle for how to think about taxes and your business health coming into the tax season. If you kind of assume that you're going to be in like the higher tax payment for your business and you've been paying your taxes all that time, anything that comes back is a little bit of a bonus for you to invest in growth initiatives as opposed to a lifeline so that you survive another year.
For sure. And by the way, there are good strategies to implement that practice, including, right, like set up a balance sheet account in your chart of accounts for your bookkeeping and accounting called estimated tax payment. So that as the business is operating and you're assuming the highest liability for your taxes, you're actually moving that from your available cash into a liabilities account that's going to offset that number. So you have always a realistic assessment of what your true available cash position is and can better effectively plan for the business and tax season as it comes. But 100% agree, if a refund is expected, that should be a nice to have, not a need to have. If you're in this position where it's a need to have, I've seen situations where an expected return was meant to be a lifeline, but the business owner didn't understand that because they were on an IRS payment plan for the previous year, they would have to just have that refund automatically applied to the outstanding balance. And so when that money didn't manifest, immediately there was a nightmarish cash crunch for the business. And those are really difficult positions to be in.
Super difficult. And I think what's harder is, and maybe it even goes back to that point of like share the nuances of your business with your trusted partner because they'll be able to give like shed light on that, but they can't shed light on that if they don't have all of the context of your business. right? And all of the historical context as well, especially if you're working with someone new, that's something that we really wanted, like, I think we do a really good job of with our team at Bags is digging super deep into not just like, here's the type of business you are and kind of like the cookie cutter ABC, that's how it ends up. It's really digging into the details of like, how were the past years? How are the past filings? How are you leading up into this new season working with us so that we really understand what the benefits were, what the challenges were? You know, sometimes if you're able to communicate just that business journey, it's much easier to extrapolate the tax implications as well. I'm going to throw us back into something that you mentioned in passing, which is tooling. You say, there's a bunch of tools out there. Let's start with your favorites. Like, what are your, we'll get into our joint favorite, but like, what are your non-bags favorite tools coming into tax season? Can be anything.
Yeah, I
Anything
mean,
goes.
yeah, I think there are awesome platforms that are designed for this purpose. The biggest one is Avalara. Avalara is expensive. That's one thing to just like say out of the gate, but it is a platform and software that is built to help make sure that taxes are compliant across every tax category. Similarly, and more focused on the sales tax, TaxJar is another software that aims to help make sure that you are compliant across the board and understand where you're liable for taxes in a way that's not always intuitive, particularly with sales tax. Like we live in a country that has so many different forms of taxes that are applicable in so many different ways, where a business needs to file a federal return and a state return, needs to pay state sales tax anywhere where there's an economic nexus, often has local or municipal taxes at the super granular level, like you might owe county taxes and payroll taxes, plus all the other ones that can apply. And so it is a complete madness to try to navigate. And Avalara, TaxJar are two of the top softwares that are designed to help navigate that.
That's cool. I'm gonna uh, cheat a little bit with my answer, but I think your best friend coming into tax season is spreadsheets. Good old spreadsheet software. I think outside of the bags is a little asterisk I'll put there. It's like I think that's how you get close to your numbers. That's how you get close to your business. That's how you get a really good understanding. And I think a lot of kind of on the flip side, one of the challenges is that, like, I guess it's the necessary thing is that proximity to the numbers to maximize the utility out of anything, right? Like if you're using a personal filing tool, we know the biggest ones out there, they're only going to be as good as your numbers are, right? And your returns are only going to be as good as how close you are to your business, how close you are to your personal finances. That's going to be mine. Why is Bags your favorite tool?
Yeah, Bags is my favorite tool simply because there are humans that are available to help work through what's going on. And I think, it's pretty straightforward to understand the annual federal and state filing, right? You know what state your business is registered in. You know you owe taxes to the federal government. The deadlines are transparent if you look for them. But as it gets into things like sales tax, there are really insane nuances. So each state has what's called a sales tax nexus, which means there's a level of economic activity or a physical presence in that state that requires the business to register to collect sales tax and to collect sales tax. Now, how do you know what determines that? Is it an origin-based sales tax? Is it a destination-based sales tax? Different states, different policies, right? Then, as you're running your business, in your financials, you're probably just recording revenue. Well, guess what? If it's a destination-based sales tax, you have to collect sales tax if you meet the economic nexus in the state when you hit a certain threshold of sales that end up in the end customers in that state. Where are you tracking that information? How are you sure if you've met the nexus anywhere or not? And that's where it can start to get really tricky, especially because some states want you to pay monthly. Some states want you to pay quarterly. And then there's questions like, cool, I'm a consumer products business and I maintain a physical location for my third-party logistics company, but they're just someone I pay to do a service. That's not me. No, if your product is physically there, guess what? That counts as a physical presence. So we have a client from California who also has to be registered for sales tax in North Dakota. There's barely any sales in the state of North Dakota, but there's a warehouse there. And so that means physical products are in that state. Sales tax must be collected. Now, if there's no sales tax to collect, but you still have to be registered and you still have to file even if it's zero. And so that's the type of place where you just want a human who can dig in and help build structures around this stuff. Because if you're not tracking, then all of a sudden you end up in a position where you're like, what states do I need to file sales tax in? And that information can be nearly impossible. It'll take hours and hours of work to go and figure out.
Actually, since we're on the topic of sales tax and that nuance, like one question that I get a lot from our customers, but also just like business owners in general, is like, how does sales tax interact with basically profitability, right? Because if you're a loss-making business at like just the top line, obviously that has very clear tax implications, but how does sales tax interplay there?
You collect sales tax on your sales. So it is a tax on the sale that you made. Whether that sale was profitable or not is not the answer. If the sales tax rate is 7.8% and you sell something for $100, you owe $7.80, no matter what that sale looks like. Now, this gets into a territory that's really weird because most businesses don't hit the sales tax nexus for a year in the first week of the year, or even the first month of the year. So how do you handle hitting nexuses at various moments throughout the year? One thing to note, it is illegal to collect sales tax when you do not meet the nexus, unless you are going to just pay it to the government anyway. So what happens to a lot of businesses is at a certain point in the year, they have to start charging sales tax in a certain state. So let's say it's New York. That's where I got the hat on. In the state of New York, if you hit the sales tax nexus in April, all of a sudden you need to start charging the New York sales tax in April. And your prices either increase 7.8% or your margin decreases by 7.8%. And it's a really difficult decision for a lot of businesses because a customer one day will show up and that's a pretty significant price jump for a lot of products. And does that affect your business's ability to sell through products? Or do you just eat the loss? But if you're in a tight margin game, or even if you're not in a tight margin game, that's a huge loss to your overall margin on a product. And these are the things that don't really make sense to me about the tax code, but it's the way it is, and we have to live with it. And just getting back to the value of bags is like, if you can help stay ahead of that, if you can make sure you know when you meet the nexus and you can be sure that you are achieving you're filing and paying those sales taxes as fast as possible, I think that's great. Now, what I will also note is that like I personally am not a CPA, so all of this is just sort of what I've learned.
But I think especially now, like get ahead of tax season early. Save yourself that stress. Know what's coming for your business and maximize those returns, right? Like don't leave anything on the table if you don't have to.
Based on my experience, if I was running a business that owed taxes for last year, this year, I would do a couple things. I would make sure that my books are clean and ready to go this month of January. I would make sure that as soon as the IRS starts allowing returns, that I am the first one in, or as close to the first one in as possible. And then I would take a break on the big picture taxes. And then I would, Ignacio, to your point, I would do an audit of my systems to make sure that I have a plan in place for sales tax, for payroll tax, for all the other taxes that might come up, and a partner to help make sure that I stay compliant with it.
Beautiful. I don't think we can end on a better note than that. Tax season coming up. Thanks for tuning in and hearing all about it with Bags.